My mother trained as a nurse at the old Westminster Teaching Hospital in London in the 1950s. On one of her first night shifts, she was doing rounds in the children's ward. Everything was fine, and all the kids were asleep. But in one of the rooms, she found the sink faucet running. She found it a bit weird, because it had been fine when she'd been by a few minutes before. She figured that one of the kids had got up and been thirsty or something, so she turned it off and carried on with the rounds. When her shift was over, she checked out with the matron, who asked if she had anything to report. She said there was nothing, except that someone had left a faucet on in one of the rooms. The matron looked horrified and gasped out, "Oh no!" She then explained that the ward was haunted by a ghost which washed its hands and leave the faucet running whenever a child was going to die. My mother laughed this off, pointed out that none of the kids in the ward were seriously ill, and went home. When she came in for her shift the next evening, she discovered that a previously perfectly fine child in that room had had a sudden seizure and died. That was a few hours after she'd found the open faucet. My mum worked night shift at the hospital in Arizona, in an old mining town by the border. Well, anyways, she's working her night shift going room to room when an old lady who walked the halls due to insomnia approached her. She told her that there's a weird goat man trying to get in through the doors. My mum didn't think too much of it, but she is religious, and that had her silently praying to herself. After a few moments, there was a sudden shriek. My mum could not explain it, but it was a loud and horrible shriek that made your blood turn to ice. She then rushed to the nurses' station to ask if anyone else heard that, in which they did. Apparently, that shriek was heard all around the hospital and freaked everyone out. A few of them went to look out the windows and see large hoof marks just by the windows and the main door. The marks had no trail towards or away from the building. I worked in a pediatric hospital and had always heard that the 4th floor right outside our oncology unit was haunted. I worked 3 12-hour shifts normally and would pick up night shifts at times. I was working in the NICU, which happened to also be on the 4th floor, but on the opposite side. The oncology unit had a staircase that was a shortcut down to the cafeteria, which was on the 2nd floor. At about 3 a.m., I was ready to take a short break and wanted a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, so I decided to take that staircase. I walked through the automatic double doors and saw a little boy skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned to me. His face seemed blurred that I can't even describe it. All I know is that he looked straight at me, and in the blink of an eye, he totally vanished. A lot of other nurses and doctors had seen the same little kid skipping in that same hallway. Of course, I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after that. But you're damn sure I didn't use that hallway at night ever again. I worked in a nursing home, so most of our patients died within a few years of being with us. Anyways, I had a new patient move into one of the rooms on my hall that my previous patient had just passed in. My new patient kept calling at night, saying that there was this woman who kept coming into her room and trying to talk to her. At first, I just passed it off on her being in her 90s and struggling with dementia, so I assured her that I would lock her door at night to make sure no one could come in. After about a week of this continuing to happen, I sat down with her and was asking what her nightly visitor looked like. Maybe she was just hallucinating her daughter or sister or something. She then proceeded to tell me that this woman had a pink robe on with blue fuzzy slippers and her hair up in curlers. She would come in, sit at the foot of her bed, pat the new patient's feet, and try to talk to her, but she couldn't understand what she was saying. I almost pissed myself. The patient that I had had in that same room went to bed every night in her pink house robe, blue slippers, and her hair in curlers. The visit stopped after about 2 weeks for some unknown reason. My mom worked in OB and told me a story that happened where she worked. There was a young Filipino woman that came in to deliver, but there were complications during the delivery and the mother died. The baby stayed in the nursery for a couple of days while its future was being decided. During that time, several people reported hearing someone singing near that baby, even when there's no adult in the room. They said the song was a lullaby, and it wasn't in English, so they all concluded it was the mother's voice. I worked in an ER for a long time on overnights while I was in the Air Force. All of the housekeepers would talk about the lady in a red dress. They would often see her down in the basement where the morgue was. We would have to go down there to the place where they did sterilizations to drop stuff off, and that was right by the morgue. No one ever saw anything. One day, a patient came in for a knife cut on his finger and needed stitches. He was a young guy with no history of mental illness or anything. He was telling me how it was difficult finding how to get to the ER and ended up in the basement until a nice lady in a red dress told him to go the other way and up the stairs, and he found us. We believed the housekeepers after that. I used to work in a skilled nursing facility where I was usually assigned to the Alzheimer's ward. One night, I was in the linen room stocking my cart, and I heard someone shuffle up behind me. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was no one else in the room. The door was still shut too. Sometime later, a lady started to complain that a man was coming into her room at night. She had Alzheimer's, so I didn't think much of it. To reassure her, I told her I'd check on her throughout the night. She complained of this man for every night for 2 more weeks when I asked her to describe him to me. The old lady said, "He's real handsome and wears a black suit. And oh, he's right behind you now, honey." That freaked me the hell out. Of course there was no one behind me. She died the next night in her sleep. I've always wanted to share this story. I used to work the ICU night shift back in my military days. Hospitals are always creepy at night, but it never really bothered me until I had a patient that was on the outs, and we were expecting for him to pass away on our shift. The rooms in our ICU have glass partitions and curtains, so you could see the patient next door. This is about 2 a.m., and while I'm in the next room over, something catches my eye. There is a man leaning over the bed, and his face is inches away from the one in the bed. I'm looking in disbelief that it's the same person staring at himself in bed. Thinking I'm losing it, I come around the partition to see if it's a co-worker in there, and no one is in the room. Maybe an hour later he passed away. To this day, I can't really explain it.